Today's Transfiguration Sunday readings are full of strange wonders, fiery chariots and dazzling clothes and magic mantles and blinding clouds. In our Old Testament reading, Elijah ascends to heaven in a spectacular whirlwind. And in Mark's Gospel, Jesus reveals his divinity on a light-soaked mountaintop. There's nothing subtle about these stories as we witness in them God's glory in its fullness. But miraculous and light-filled as they are, these are not happy stories. Embedded in each is a threshold filled with bewilderment and loss and perhaps a little fear. A line, if you will, marking a before and an after with an unavoidable crossing over. No going back, no unseeing or unknowing. Thresholds are often like that. Sometimes we cross over in grief, pining for what we're leaving behind. And sometimes we move forward in fear, convinced that whatever lies ahead will be beyond our capacity to handle. And sometimes we refuse to cross over at all until necessity forces us to put one foot in front of the other. Yet ultimately, we go, because risky as it feels, the evolution inherent in crossing thresholds is integral to our faith, our becoming, if you will, as we embrace the divine spark within us, the spark revealed in Jesus. Jesus, the love of God incarnate, who came in human form through a virgin birth, the Messiah born according to prophecy. In that moment, the threat of a king was all the powers of the day could hear. Jesus' divinity at the time seemed a somehow lesser thing, disappearing into the story of a young child who dazzled at the temple, recognized only by a select few for what and who he was. A carpenter turned rabbi whose teachings and healings caught the attention of a people starved for hope, who gathered a band of brothers, disciples, regular folk in the day, and brought them with him in his travels. Like Elisha following Elijah, these friends of Jesus listened to his teachings and witnessed his miracles. They knew their master as a teacher, a storyteller, a healer, and a traveling companion. His face, his manners, his mission, all of these things were familiar to them. Familiar, endearing, and safe, and unquestionably human, until Jesus' teachings pushed them to look deeper. 6 days prior to today's story in Mark, Jesus and the disciples were walking the villages around Caesarea Philippi. And as they walked, Jesus asked the disciples who people said he was. He then explained his true self to them, with Peter objecting, and Jesus correcting him, admonishing him to focus and follow Jesus' lead. From there, Mark tells us that Jesus takes 3 disciples with him to a mountain apart, Peter among them, where the unimaginable happens. Before their very eyes, Jesus changes, becoming at once both fully himself and fully unrecognizable. And suddenly, just like Elisha, Jesus' stunned disciples find themselves standing upon a threshold. This strange and wondrous story of Jesus' mountaintop journey seems almost to unfold outside of time, as this trio of puzzled and dazzled disciples witness Jesus' exchange with Moses and Elijah. The man they thought they knew is suddenly more, light-filled, transformed, transfigured, his divine nature revealed. In that moment, their lives are forever changed, and they too are transfigured, though they don't fully know it yet, because there's simply no way anyone could be the same after an event like this. A God moment so powerful it changes them completely, pulling them and us across a threshold from then to now. The transfiguring of Jesus provides a dazzling, dizzying experience for those who have accompanied him up the mountain. And one can well understand that Peter, James, and John would desire to find a form for their experience, some kind of container, to help them absorb and define what has taken place. We see this in Peter's impulse to construct dwellings for Jesus, Moses, and Elijah. Faced with an event of overwhelming spiritual importance, Peter responds at a physical level. Let me build something, a monument to the event, somewhere to stay, to process, to revel in the moment and hold on to it, to give it story and context, to fit it into their way of being in the world and their understanding of how they know God, to weave this new thing into something familiar. I understand that need for an anchor point. In places where we see what we've known, what we've relied on and believed in, all changing and crumbling before our very eyes, we reach for that same kind of spot. The events of this past year hardly qualify as a mountaintop moment, but they fit that description, don't they? Unexpected, life-changing. Here for us at First United Methodist, a move first from 2 pastors to 1, during a pandemic whose length and breadth of impact has rewritten life as we thought we knew it, locally and globally. The impending loss of 2 pastors and anticipation of yet another one with pandemic requirements changing the face of how they will be received and how we will literally be able to see them. All of these are unanticipated thresholds that push us to look beyond all we think we know, when what we really want is simply to hold fast to the familiar. I would offer to you that today's story suggests that we can have both. The holding fast simply looks different now. The events of this past year are a long transfiguration of church as we've known it, of life as we've known it. Standing now at the threshold of understanding that our familiar, the anchor we seek to build, is to trust in the future that God holds for each of us. In our earlier Old Testament reading, Elisha's salvation comes in the long silence after the glory, when he chooses to stand up, shoulder his grief, take up his teacher's mantle, and cross a threshold into a new and unfamiliar life. His choice is neither easy nor inevitable, but it bears witness to the faith that is forged in us when we make the hard choice to cross over, even if it be battered or fearful and trembling. Theologically, the story of Jesus' transfiguration is important because it reveals Christ's divine nature. It also foreshadows his death, secures his place in the stream of Israel's salvific history, and prefigures his resurrection. But to put it in human terms, in some ways, ultimately the story pivots around Peter, James, and John, the 3 terrified disciples who witness it, as before their very eyes, Jesus changes, becoming at once both fully himself and fully strange. Where suddenly, just like Elisha, Jesus' stunned disciples find themselves standing on that threshold. The man they thought they knew is suddenly more, and the path that lies ahead of him, a path that must end on another high place, a hill called Golgotha, upends everything the disciples think they understand about Jesus. As this phase of their life and their self-understanding ends, what will it look like to begin another? They have journeyed with Jesus, the minister, the rabbi, the healer, the teacher. Will they now journey with him toward the cross? Or will they insist, as Peter briefly does in his fear and confusion, on remaining exactly where they are, sedentary and safe? Peter wants to capture the moment, but Jesus tells Peter, James, and John, no monument, no dwelling, and no story. Because the monument is them. It's us. This change, this transfiguration is contained not in structure or in safety, but in the temples they and each of us have been given in ourselves. Mark punctuates this point in today's story. After all of what happened on the mountaintop, Jesus didn't linger in those dazzling moments. He crossed his own threshold from humanity to divinity, took a breath, and came back down the mountain. and so did Peter, James, and John. Down to where the rest of the disciples are, down to where we are, down to the challenges of life here below, down to the problems and discomforts and discouragements that are part and parcel of our life in this world. Down, if we read closely, to the crucifixion. Jesus orders them not to tell anyone until after the Son of Man has risen from the dead. Jesus wasn't transfigured for his sake. He was transfigured for our sake, to reveal his divine self and to remind us of the glory and power we carry into the world as we follow him. So, how do we do that? There is a curious tension that life asks us to hold, to claim and live into a vision while at the same time remaining open to the surprises that occur. Those moments when after weeks or months or sometimes years, our faithfulness in showing up and tending the vision suddenly draws us into a dramatic new way of seeing and working. Even as we lean in the direction of our vision, the process asks us to relax our hold on our fixed ideas and our habitual patterns so that we can recognize what waits to emerge. This is, in essence, transfiguration. So on this threshold that draws us from one season into another, the story of the Transfiguration invites us to see both the mountaintop and apply it to everyday life. To pay attention to what stirs in us this story of the three who followed Jesus up the mountain and had to follow him back down again. To allow our seeing to alter us in such a way that we may enter the world again and again in the company of Christ, who travels with us every moment. Says Jan Richardson of Painted Prayer Book in her reflections, Dazzling and When Glory, written for Transfiguration Sunday, these words: "Believe me, I know how tempting it is to remain inside this blessing, to linger where everything is dazzling and clear. We could build walls around this blessing, put a roof over it. We could bring in a table and chairs and have the most amazing meals. We could make a home we could stay. But this blessing is built for leaving. This blessing is made for coming down the mountain. This blessing wants to be in motion, to travel with you as you return to level ground. It will seem strange how quiet this blessing becomes when it returns to earth. It is not shy and it is not afraid. It simply knows how to bide its time, to watch and wait, to discern and pray until the moment comes when it will reveal everything it knows, where it will shine forth with all it has seen, when it will dazzle with the unforgettable light you have carried all this way. That when glory comes, we will open our eyes to see it. That when glory shows up, we will let ourselves be overcome not by fear, but by the love it bears. That when glory shines, we will bring it back with us all the way, all the way, all the way down. Amen and amen.